Have you ever wondered what happens when a town is forgotten by time? When its people, their stories, and even their struggles vanish from history, leaving behind only whispers in the wind? This is the story of one such town, one that lived in the shadow of its glory days, waiting for a spark of hope to reignite its soul. The sun had barely begun to set over the sleepy, forgotten town of Evershade, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet. The town, nestled between towering mountains and thick forests, had once been a thriving hub of commerce and culture. But as the years passed, its roads grew empty, its markets silent, and its people drifted away, looking for opportunity in more bustling places. All that remained was the town's fading heartbeat, pulsing weakly in the form of the handful of residents who chose to stay behind. Among them was Lila Green, a young woman in her early 30s who had lived in Evershade her entire life. Despite its abandoned air, Lila loved her town. Her heart beat with its memories, from the laughter of children playing in the streets to the hustle of the old town square that once thrived with vendors selling their goods. Those days seemed like a distant dream now, buried beneath the layers of neglect and isolation. But in Lila's heart, Evershade was still alive, still holding on to the fragments of a forgotten past. It wasn't that Lila didn't have dreams of her own. She had left for a time, seeking work in the city, thinking that life outside would bring her more opportunities. But no matter where she went, the shadow of Evershade followed her, pulling her back. She couldn't shake the feeling that the town had more to offer, more life to give, if only someone believed in it. So Lila returned to the town, to her childhood home, where the windows creaked and the air smelled of old pine trees. And she stayed. Life in Evershade was slow. Each morning, Lila would walk along the cobblestone streets, feeling as if she were the only soul alive in the whole town. But one afternoon, something unexpected happened. As she was walking by the old library, a building that had stood tall in its heyday, now crumbling and covered in ivy, she noticed something that made her stop in her tracks. A small piece of paper was stuck to the door, fluttering in the breeze. It was an advertisement for a town meeting. At first, Lila thought nothing of it. But then, curiosity gripped her. The last time Evershade had held any kind of town meeting was years ago. People had long since stopped showing up. She decided to attend, just to see who else might still care about the town. The evening of the meeting arrived, and the town hall was dimly lit, with only a few scattered residents in attendance. Lila sat down near the front, her eyes scanning the room. There was Arthur Thompson, an elderly man who had been the town's mayor decades ago. He sat hunched in his chair, his once sharp eyes now clouded with age. Beside him, the town's baker, Mary, whose bakery was the last remaining business in town, stared at the floor, lost in thought. A few others trickled in, but the turnout was sparse. Finally, the meeting began. Arthur Thompson stood and addressed the group, his voice raspy but steady. "Friends," he began, "we all know what's happened to our beloved town. It's with a heavy heart that I say, Evershade is dying. We've lost our people, our businesses, our spirit. But I still believe there's hope for us, if we come together and fight for it." Lila's heart raced. Could it be true? Could Evershade really be saved? As Arthur continued speaking, a wave of emotions washed over her. She had been yearning for someone to say those very words, to acknowledge that the town wasn't beyond saving. But Arthur's next words cut through the air like a dagger. "There's been talk of selling the land," he said softly. "The developers are eyeing it, ready to tear it down and build new resorts. But before we let that happen, I want us to think carefully. We've spent our lives here, and we owe it to this place to try." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Evershade was not just a town to these people. It was their home, their legacy. But what could they do to bring it back? The truth was, most had given up hope. They had accepted that this was their fate, and moving forward meant leaving the past behind. But Lila couldn't accept that. Not yet. After the meeting, Lila stayed behind, her mind buzzing with ideas. She was determined to be the spark that would reignite the town's forgotten spirit. But she knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed help. she needed allies. The next few weeks were filled with small steps. Lila started reaching out to the remaining residents, organizing meetings and gathering ideas. Slowly, people began to believe in the possibility of revival. The old town hall was cleaned up and repainted, and the streets were swept of dust. They started small, with weekly farmers' markets and arts festivals to bring back the town's sense of community. Lila even reached out to the nearby towns, inviting tourists to explore Evershade's hidden beauty. One evening, as Lila was walking home after a long day of planning, she encountered a man she hadn't seen in years. It was Noah Parks, a childhood friend who had left Evershade to become a journalist. They had once been inseparable, exploring the woods together, dreaming about the future. But Noah had left when the town began to fade, seeking something bigger, something brighter. He had become a successful reporter in the city, but now, here he was, standing in front of her. "Lila," he said, a mix of surprise and warmth in his voice. "You're still here?" "I couldn't leave," Lila replied with a smile. "I couldn't let Evershade die. Not without trying." Noah looked at her with a blend of admiration and concern. "I've been reading about the things you're doing here. It's incredible, Lila. But are you sure this is the right fight? There are bigger places out there. Places where you could do more, have more." Lila met his gaze, her eyes steady. "Noah, this is my home, and I believe in it. Evershade might be forgotten now, but it doesn't mean it has to stay that way. We have something here that no city could offer. A story, a history, a heartbeat that's waiting to be felt again." Noah hesitated for a moment, as if weighing the choices in his mind. Then, with a sigh, he smiled. "You always were stubborn. All right, I'm in. What do we do first?" From that moment on, the two of them became the driving force behind the revitalization efforts. Noah brought in his journalistic skills, writing about the town's history, its people, and the fight for its future. His articles attracted attention from the local media, and soon, the town was getting the recognition it deserved. Tourists began to trickle in, curious about the little town that was defying the odds. But it wasn't just the outside world that took notice. The people of Evershade, too, began to believe again. They started restoring their homes, planting gardens, and reopening old businesses. The town began to pulse with life once more, a heart beating stronger with each passing day. Months later, as the first snow of winter fell softly over the town, the community gathered at the newly renovated town square for a celebration. The lights twinkled like stars, and the air was filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and hot cocoa. Evershade was alive again. Lila stood at the center, her eyes glistening with tears as she watched the faces of the people she had fought for. She had given everything to this place, and now, Evershade was giving back to her. It was no longer a forgotten town. It was a town reborn, with hope and love at its core. And as the clock struck midnight, Lila knew that the heartbeat of Evershade would never fade again.